Welcome to my educational series where you can improve your English proficiency and prepare for exams like TOEFL and IELTS. In this episode, we'll focus on an academic topic. You will hear talk followed by several questions. I recommend that you take some notes while listening because it will help you at the end of the conversation to answer all of the questions in the quiz correctly. So, let's get started.
All right, so welcome back for another deep dive, and today we're going to be going back in time.
Ooh, time travel.
Yeah, well, kinda. Back to early America and looking at this really interesting period when everything started to change,
Yeah, the Industrial Revolution.
Right, exactly. Like the shift from, these skilled craftsmen doing everything by hand to, the rise of factories and all these machines taking over production.
Just like blacksmiths and shoemakers and all that being replaced by big noisy factories.
Exactly. And we've got these great excerpts from Craftsman versus Industrialization to help us unpack all of this.
Oh, cool. I love that title.
Yeah, it really sets the stage right. So we'll be focusing specifically on what happened in the U.S. after 1815.
Got it. So post-war of 1812, America.
Yep. And we're going to be exploring how all of this impacted the everyday lives of, the average worker.
Like, did their lives get better or worse, with all these changes?
That's exactly what we're going to get into. And, we'll also look at how the ripple effects of this shift are still shaping our world today.
Wow. I mean, that's crazy to think about, like, how stuff from way back then is still affecting us now.
It really is. So let's start by setting the scene, before all these factories popped up. What did work life actually look like back then?
Okay, so imagine, life moves at a much slower pace, right? The rhythm of work is set by, like, the seasons and the sun.
Yeah, like sunrise to sunset.
Exactly. So you've got these skilled craftsmen, right? Like your blacksmiths, your shoemakers, weavers. They're the backbone of the economy.
And they were making, like, pretty much everything people needed.
Yeah, pretty much. They weren't just laborers, though. They were like artists.
Artists?
Yeah, seriously. They took raw materials and, using their own two hands, they turned them into these beautiful and functional objects.
Like, I guess you don't really think of a blacksmith as an artist, but...
Right, but when you see what they could do, it's pretty amazing. And it wasn't a solitary thing either,
So they weren't just, like, working alone in their workshops?
Nope. They had apprentices and journeymen working alongside them, learning the trade, carrying on the tradition.
So it was like a whole community.
Exactly. It was all about passing down knowledge from one generation to the next.
And what about women? What were they doing in this pre-industrial world?
Oh, women were essential to the economy, too. A lot of production was happening in the home. So women were, spinning yarn, weaving cloth, making candles, all sorts of stuff that people needed back then.
So it sounds like this system, the artisan system, was built on personal connection and, like, a deep respect for expertise.
Definitely, the relationship between a master craftsman and his apprentice wasn't just about teaching skills. It was about fostering a sense of community,
Yeah, like a mentorship kind of thing.
Exactly. And for the apprentice, it was a pathway to, upward mobility.
So they could actually, like, improve their station in life.
Absolutely. That was, like, the driving force behind the whole system.
So how did that work? Like, could an apprentice actually become a master craftsman someday?
Oh, yeah, that was the goal. So a young guy would start as an apprentice learning the ropes from a master.
Learning
the basics. And then through hard work and dedication, he could eventually become a journeyman.
A journeyman. So is that like a step up from an apprentice?
It is, yeah. A journeyman would travel around working for different masters, honing his skills even further.
So, like, getting even more experience.
Exactly. And then finally, after all that, he could establish his own workshop, take on apprentices of his own, and become a respected member of the community.
Wow. So, like, the American dream right there.
Pretty much. It wasn't easy, but it was possible. And that really fueled ambition, gave people a sense of possibility.
Which is a pretty stark contrast to what came next, right? Factory system. So what happened? What were the driving forces behind that massive shift?
Well, there were a bunch of things happening all at once.
Like what?
Well, transportation got a whole lot better, canals, and then railroads started connecting distant markets, so goods could be transported much faster and cheaper.
So, like, suddenly it was possible to sell stuff all over the country, not just locally.
Right, and at the same time, cities were growing rapidly because of people moving in from rural areas and also immigration from overseas.
So more people needing more stuff.
Exactly. And all of that created a demand for goods on a scale never seen before.
So like the old artisan system just couldn't keep up?
Pretty much. Plus, there was a lot more capital available, money to invest, and entrepreneurs were eager to put that money into new technologies and systems that promised efficiency and profit.
Ah, so that's where the machines come into play.
Exactly. The factory system was all about mass production, churning out goods as quickly and cheaply as possible.
But how did that change the experience of work for, the everyday person?
Oh, it was a huge shift. Think about it like a skilled weaver, right? He's used to the rhythm of his loom, the feel of the fabric in his hands.
Yeah, like a real craftsman.
Exactly. And then suddenly he's in this massive factory surrounded by noisy machines. The air is thick with dust and the smell of oil.
Not a very pleasant work environment.
No, not at all. And instead of creating a whole piece from start to finish, he's now responsible for tending a single machine.
Oh, wow. So like just doing one tiny repetitive task over and over again.
Yeah, hour after hour. And our source actually uses the phrase rigid factory clock to describe this new reality.
Rigid factory clock. What does that even mean? Like, what did that actually look like?
Well, basically it meant a loss of autonomy, a loss of control over your own time and pace.
So no more setting your own hours.
Nope. The factory whistle told you when to start and when to stop, and every minute was accounted for.
Wow, so it was like a whole different world.
It was. And in some factories, workers were fined for being even a few minutes late, and their wages were docked for any time spent away from their machines.
Seriously, just for taking a break?
Yeah. And there are even accounts of workers being punished for talking or laughing or even pausing to catch their breath.
Oh my gosh. So it wasn't just the change in the nature of work itself, but a change in the whole culture of work.
Exactly. The focus shifted from craftsmanship to efficiency, from quality to quantity.
So like making as much stuff as possible, as cheaply as possible.
Yeah, and the personal pride that an artisan took in his work, the connection he felt to the finished product, that was pretty much lost in the anonymity of the factory floor.
So did this new system, the factory system, did it still provide that same pathway to upward mobility that existed in the old artisan system?
Well, at first, factory wages were actually pretty good, especially compared to what a lot of agricultural workers were earning.
So it seemed like a good opportunity.
Yeah, but the reality was that advancement opportunities within the factory system were limited.
Like there wasn't really anywhere to go.
Right. There was this very clear hierarchy, this division between management and labor, and it wasn't easy to cross that divide.
So even if you worked really hard, you were probably still going to be stuck in the same position.
Yeah, pretty much. And while some workers might have been able to move into supervisory roles, the dream of owning your own business, of achieving that level of independence became a lot harder to realize.
So it sounds like this new system, while it did create some opportunities, it also created winners and losers, both economically and socially.
That's right. And the people who felt the brunt of these changes, they weren't just going to sit back and take it. They started to organize and fight for better working conditions and a bigger share of the economic pie.
So this is where we see the beginnings of the labor movement in America.
Exactly. It was a direct response to the conditions created by industrialization.
So tell me more about these early unions. What were they trying to achieve?
Well, in 1834, a bunch of skilled craftsmen from various trades came together to form the National Trades Union, one of the first attempts to create a national labor federation in the U.S.
So like a union of unions?
Pretty much. And their goals were ambitious. They wanted to reduce the workday to 10 hours, improve safety conditions in factories, and secure better wages for their members.
Sounds pretty reasonable.
Right. But they faced a lot of opposition. Public opinion was often against them. Many people viewed unions as being radical or even dangerous.
And the government wasn't very supportive either, right?
No, not really. The government often sided with the business owners, and they would use legal and sometimes even military force to suppress strikes and protests.
Wow, so it was a real uphill battle for these early unions.
It definitely was, and then the Panic of 1837 hit, and that was a devastating blow to the whole movement.
The Panic of 1837, what was that?
It was a major economic downturn. Widespread unemployment. It gave employers even more leverage over workers because people were so desperate for jobs.
So they could basically dictate their own terms.
Pretty much. It made it much easier to break strikes and resist demands for better wages and working conditions.
And what happened to the unions?
A lot of them just collapsed, including National Trades Union. It would take decades for the labor movement to recover from that setback and start making real progress.
It's crazy to think about how much of what we take for granted today in terms of worker rights, the 40-hour work week, workplace safety regulations, all of that. It's the result of those early, often forgotten struggles.
It's a legacy that's often overlooked, but it's important to remember where these rights came from and the sacrifices that were made to achieve them.
For sure. So as we wrap up this deep dive, what are some key takeaways? What should our listeners be thinking about?
Well, first of all, I think it's important to recognize that progress isn't always linear,
Like sometimes things get worse before they get better.
Exactly. The shift from skilled craftsmen to factory workers, it brought economic growth, but it also led to a loss of worker autonomy, a decline in the quality of work.
And contributed to social and economic inequalities.
Yeah, exactly. And it also sparked this ongoing struggle between, the forces of progress and the need for social and economic justice.
Which is a struggle that continues to this day.
It does. And as we face the challenges and opportunities of our own time, things like automation, the gig economy, the growing divide between the haves and have-nots.
Right, all the stuff we're dealing with now.
Yeah, exactly. Well, the lessons from this historical shift can help guide us, help us figure out how to make sure that the benefits of technological progress are shared more equitably, how to create a future of work that provides both economic security and a sense of dignity and purpose for everyone.
That's a lot to think about, and I think you've given our listeners plenty to ponder. So we covered a lot of ground today. We saw how skilled craftsmen built their lives around their trades, only to see that world upended by the rise of factories and the demands of industrial capitalism.
Yeah, it was a real turning point in history.
It was, and we explored the human cost of this transition, the loss of autonomy, the erosion of skills, the widening gap between workers and those who controlled the means of production.
But we also saw the seeds of resistance, the emergence of those early labor movements that dared to challenge the status quo.
Which I think is a really important point. Even in the face of these massive changes, people still found ways to fight for their rights.
They did, and that's a reminder that change is always possible, even when the odds seem stacked against you.
It's so true. Well, that's it for today's deep dive. Thanks for joining us, and a special thanks to you for sharing your expertise with us today.
Oh, it was my pleasure. Thanks for having me.
And to our listeners out there, we'll leave you with this final thought as we continue to navigate the uncharted waters of a rapidly changing technological landscape. Remember, the lessons of the past, they can serve as a compass, guiding us toward a future where work isn't just about making a living, but about living a meaningful life.
And don't be afraid to challenge the status quo.
Words to live by, folks. Until next time.
Thank you for joining me today. I hope you have learned something new and useful, and see you in the next episode. Bye.